The committee believes that more than sufficient evidence exists for a criminal referral of former President Trump.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The tax forms were really never audited.
We have to release all of it.
This committee action will set a terrible precedent.
We will win because we are united. Ukraine, America, and the entire free world.
The January 6th committee's final report is out.
Really, the committee has written a living document for the public to take advantage of.
Accountability's coming.
A very busy week to close out. Just watching that makes you want to fall asleep. A very busy week closing out an even busier and more consequential year. And according to our next two guests, we started 2022 as divided as we have ever been since Lincoln. But if the midterms are any indication, we and democracy prevailed yet again. Here now, celebrated author and presidential historian Michael Beschloss. His latest book, Presidents of War, joins us. Also here, historian John Meacham, who occasionally advises President Biden. He is the author of many, many amazing things, but most recently, And Then There Was Light, Abraham Lincoln and the American Struggle. Both are out now, gentlemen. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I am grateful for all that you do for us. I'm grateful for your friendship. I want to talk about this week and this year. John, think about our democracy and the hurdles we crossed this year. What's your takeaway?
Yeah. Well, you think about this administration. It began an era of disease, distrust, and insurrection in January 2021. And besides that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play, right? And yet, here we are, 23 months later, and just enough of us. And remember, that's what democracy is. This is not a 90-10 proposition. It's barely a 60-40 proposition. It's really 51-49. Will just enough of us decide that for all of its imperfections, the constitutional order is worth preserving because it has, in fact, produced a more perfect union. And we want to preserve those possibilities. What you saw in the midterm elections with the defeat of the clearly wrong, cynical, misled election deniers was a vote for truth. We can disagree on policy. I think we all pray for a moment where we go and we're all arguing about marginal tax rates again, right? Mm-hmm. Bob Dole versus George Mitchell. Let's take it, right? That's fine. We fantasize about this, if only we could have Bob Dole and George Mitchell fighting again. But if we disagree about reality, then we're doomed. American democracy is not a reality show. It's reality. And I think just enough of us have recognized that anew.
Well, what's the reality of where we are right now, Michael? Because democracy has prevailed.
Democracy has prevailed, and let's just enjoy this moment. This year is closing in a wonderful way. At the beginning of this year, there was a chance that there would be, just as John is saying, an election in which 5 or 6 key states for the election of 2024 would be dominated by election deniers and threats of violence, and we could have lost a very big part of our democracy. That did not happen. The people spoke, and they made the right choice. And then now we've got this January 6th committee report. Let's imagine if that had not happened. If that had not happened, and if you had not had this committee of the House saying that there was an insurrection, it almost succeeded, almost took away our democracy, and Donald Trump was at the center of it. If you didn't have a report saying that, democracy is to some extent what we normalize. And if that had been normalized, candidates of the future who lose presidential elections and other elections would have done what Kari Lake is doing in Arizona. They would have said, I really won the election. And, let's have some turbulence to demonstrate that I should be installed, even though, the voters and the institutions say otherwise. So between the election of this year and the January 6th report, it sort of reminds me 60 years ago, President Kennedy had an interview in the Oval Office with reporters from the three networks. It was just after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he said, "I think we ought to be rather pleased with ourselves this Christmas." He said that because we had just been through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, this wasn't a missile crisis, but we've been through big threats to our democracy. We've survived and prospered. The system is working.
John, democracy, I'm going to say, was on everyone's minds after we saw that extraordinary speech from Ukrainian President Zelensky earlier this week. We haven't seen Congress this unified in a really long time, have we?
No, and I think that it's a hopeful sign. It's a battle, not the war, speaking metaphorically. President Zelensky is a reminder that this isn't laser tag, right? That democracy, the future of democratic capitalism, human rights, this isn't just stuff people tweet about and post on their own social media sites they set up because they incite insurrection and get thrown off another, right? This is a real thing. What's unfolding in the largest European struggle in several generations is the oldest kind of human dynamic. Someone strong sees someone he believes is weaker and wants what they have. They want to take. Putin wants to take. What democracy is about is a rule of law that protects the weak from the strong and creates what Lincoln called an open field and a fair chance. And that's a perennial struggle. And one of the caveat here, and as we close out this year, is that as we have seen, these institutions at home and abroad are inherently fragile because they're human institutions and we're fragile. And our struggle in our own hearts and minds and souls between our better angels and our worst instincts is a perennial one. What we have to remind ourselves all the time is that when those better angels prevail, all of us do better.
For the last 5 or 6 years, Michael, we've been concerned, you've been concerned that we no longer agree on what's right and wrong or a common set of truths. But as we close out the year, President Zelensky, with the exception of a few far-right rabble-rousers, got pretty extraordinary bipartisan support this week. So as you look to 2023, is there a chance that maybe we are coming back to a more rational place?
Would sure be nice to think, and I think the other evening was a harbinger of that. I agree with you, Stephanie, because, one of the toughest things I think John would agree for a president to do is get Americans to make pretty big sacrifices for a place that they know very little about. That's what George H.W. Bush tried to do with Kuwait in 1990 and 1991, said, it's not just Kuwait, we're trying to establish the principle that a country can't just invade another and take it because they feel like it. That's something that President Biden was able to do this day, or was able to do with Ukraine, with the American people. And the other thing is that, go back to the beginning of this country. Jefferson and others hoped that the contagion of democracy would spread around the world, that people who loved freedom would fight for it, even if it meant that they would die for it. That's what we're seeing in Ukraine. So at the same time as we're seeing democracy strengthened, and I hope to God strengthened permanently, at least for our lifetimes in the United States, we see brave Ukrainians fighting for democracy and freedom in their own country. I think if our founders came back, they would shed a tear. One other thing, if I might say, Stephanie, another historical event. Tomorrow is your birthday. If I could say to all of our friends who are watching, happy birthday. I don't know of a better thing to have than to have a birthday right on the day before Christmas and during the holiday season.
My birthday, as well as Dr. Anthony Fauci. Thank you both. That is very, very kind of you to say. Pleasure. I'm not really a birthday person. I think adult birthdays are like cereal. They're for children. They're not to be celebrated. It's Christmas. We got bigger things to celebrate. Thank you both. That is so kind of you. It is great to see you both.